Autonomous decision systems aren't a future concept anymore. They're here, quietly running in the background of daily life. They approve and deny loans. They flag fraud. They decide which job applications get seen and which disappear. They help route emergency services. They recommend medical next steps. They influence what you watch, what you buy, who you trust, and sometimes what you fear. And that raises a simple but uncomfortable question: when a machine makes a decision that changes a human life, what does it even mean for that decision to be ethical? Because ethics, traditionally, comes with a face. A person. Someone you can question. Someone who can explain why they did what they did, and who can be held responsible. But autonomy changes the shape of the problem. Decisions become fast, distributed, automated, scaled. They happen in milliseconds, millions of times, across populations. And suddenly the most important part of the conversation isn't, can we make the system work? It's, when it works, who does it work for? And who does it quietly harm? Welcome to the BI channel. I'm 𝗓𝗵𝗲, and today we're stepping into one of the most urgent ethical challenges of the intelligence age, the ethics of autonomous decision systems. We're doing this as a panel discussion because no single lens is enough. You need strategy. You need cognitive science. You need engineering reality. So I've brought together three voices who live at that intersection. 𝗬𝗓 is an executive strategist focused on human-centered intelligence and the real-world organizational choices that shape what gets deployed. Dr. Elena Ruiz is a clinical intelligence and cognitive systems specialist, and she studies how these systems intersect with attention, identity, emotion, and mental well-being. And 𝗂𝗵𝗵 is an AI systems architect and simulation futurist, which means he's thinking about how autonomy gets built, how it behaves in complex environments, and how safety can be embedded into the structure itself. We're going to break this down in 6 segments. First, we'll define what we mean by autonomous decision systems. Then we'll talk about the ethical tension between speed and responsibility. After that, human oversight and cognitive boundaries. Then bias, fairness, and invisible harm. Then accountability. And finally, what designing ethical autonomy could look like in practice. Let's get into it. Stella, Elena, Aiden, welcome.
Thanks, 𝗓𝗵𝗲. This is one of those topics where everyone thinks they understand it until you ask one follow-up question. Autonomy sounds like efficiency, innovation, progress, and it can be all of those, but without a clear ethical foundation, it becomes a kind of power that operates without reflection.
Thank you for having me. What concerns me is that autonomous systems don't just make decisions about people. Many of them increasingly make decisions that shape people, how we think, how we feel, how we interpret reality. Ethics has to protect the human mind, not only the human outcome.
Glad to be here. From an architecture standpoint, ethical behavior can't be an inspirational poster on the wall. It has to be engineered. Constraints, checks, and clear failure modes are what separate a responsible autonomous system from a dangerous one.
Segment 1, Clarity. Autonomous decision systems is a phrase people use like it's obvious. But depending on who you ask, it means something different. Stella, when you say autonomous decision system, what are we talking about in plain terms?
In plain terms, it's a system that takes an input and produces a decision or action without waiting for a human to approve each instance. It's not just suggesting, it's deciding. And 2 properties matter here. One is independence. The system is allowed to act. The second is scale. It can do that repeatedly, across many cases, very quickly. So a human loan officer looking at one application is not autonomy. A model that screens 1,000 applications and auto-approves or auto-denies based on learned patterns, now you're in autonomous decision territory. And the reason this matters ethically is that scaling a decision scales the consequences too. If the decision contains a flaw or bias, it doesn't just hurt one person. It hurts thousands.
Elena, from your side, how do you define it? Especially when the decision isn't something obvious like yes or no, but something psychological.
I look at autonomy in terms of interaction loops. A system observes human behavior, infers something about the person, and then adjusts what it presents or does. That adjustment is a decision. For example, a recommendation system might infer that you're anxious based on what you're reading. It then feeds you more content that keeps your attention, maybe content designed to escalate emotion. That's not a yes or no decision, but it is a decision with real impact. And the autonomy is that it doesn't need a human to approve the next recommendation. It continuously adapts and influences. So we have to broaden the definition. Autonomous decision systems aren't only about administrative outcomes. They can be about attention, emotion, belief formation, and identity.
𝗂𝗵, bring us to the engineering reality. What makes something truly autonomous as opposed to just automated rules?
Great distinction. A rules-based script can be automated without being meaningfully autonomous. Autonomy shows up when the system has internal models, optimization objectives, and the ability to adapt its behavior based on feedback. Technically, you might see a combination of components: a model that predicts outcomes, an agent that chooses actions, and feedback loops that update behavior based on results. So think of a fraud system that doesn't just flag transactions, but actively blocks accounts, changes thresholds on the fly, and learns from past false positives and misfraud. It's operating like a semi-independent decision agent inside an organization. And here's the ethical kicker. Once you have an optimizing system, it will chase whatever you measure. If you measure speed, it will optimize speed. If you measure profit, it will optimize profit. If you measure engagement, it will optimize engagement. If you want ethics, you have to define what the system is allowed to optimize and what boundaries it must never cross.
So in other words, autonomy is not just the computer did it. It's the computer has permission to do it repeatedly, at scale, in a way that adapts over time. That brings us to segment 2, the ethical tension. Autonomy is fast. Ethics is slow. Not because ethics is inefficient, but because ethics requires reflection, context, and sometimes the willingness to say, even if we can, maybe we shouldn't. Stella, you work with organizations that love speed. Where does this tension show up most clearly?
It shows up in incentives and pressure. An organization sees that an autonomous system can reduce costs, reduce time, increase scale. So they roll it out quickly, sometimes faster than their ability to govern it. And there's a narrative that creeps in. If we don't do it, someone else will. Or, we can fix it later. But with decision systems, later means people already got denied, flagged, excluded, misclassified. Speed becomes a moral choice, because prioritizing speed over validation isn't neutral. It's choosing to experiment on the public. The tension is most visible when a system is used at high stakes: healthcare triage, policing, credit, employment, child welfare, immigration decisions. In those spaces, the cost of being wrong is not just inconvenience. It's dignity and opportunity.
Elena, when you hear move fast, what do you think about from a cognitive and clinical angle?
I think about harm that doesn't announce itself. In clinical settings, we're trained to look for delayed effects, side effects, cumulative impacts. But tech systems often judge success by immediate metrics. So you can have a system that is working because it increases engagement today, or reduces call center time this week, but it might be training users into dependence, reinforcing anxiety loops, or altering self-perception over months. Ethics is slow because humans are slow. Our meaning-making is slow. Trauma, persuasion, shame, identity shifts, those are slow. If an autonomous system is allowed to run fast without boundaries, it can shape the human experience faster than a person can understand what's happening to them. And that creates a power imbalance. The system adapts in real time. The human adapts in slow motion.
𝗂𝗵, in engineering terms, can we reconcile speed and responsibility? Or is that wishful thinking?
You can reconcile them, but not by hoping. You do it by building what I like to call ethical throttles. An ethical throttle is a system-level constraint that says you can move fast within the safe zone, and you must slow down outside of it. For example, If a decision is low stakes, high confidence, well audited, you can allow full automation. But if confidence drops, or if the decision touches protected classes, or if potential harm crosses a threshold, the system must escalate a human review, or run additional checks, or even pause. Speed isn't the enemy. Unbounded speed is. And the other reconciliation mechanism is simulation. Before deploying, you run the system through synthetic populations, adversarial tests, edge cases. You don't just test average performance. You test how it fails. Ethics lives in failure modes.
That's such a key phrase, ethics lives in failure modes. Okay, segment 3, human oversight and cognitive boundaries. There's a line everyone repeats, keep humans in the loop. But what does that actually mean? A lot of times it's said as a comfort phrase. Like adding a human magically solves the ethical problem. Stella, where do humans really need to remain in control?
Humans need to remain in control when the decision requires moral interpretation, not just pattern recognition. If a system detects fraud patterns, fine. But if it decides that a person is high risk and that label changes our access to essential services, you need human judgment. And not rubber stamp humans. Real oversight, people with authority to intervene, enough time to evaluate, and clear guidelines. Also, humans need to be in control where nuance matters. A model might know correlations. It doesn't understand context, temporary hardship, medical crises, local economic shocks, cultural differences. The danger is letting autonomy replace judgment in places where judgment is the whole point.
Elena, you've talked about protecting the human mind. What are cognitive boundaries in this context?
A cognitive boundary is a line we draw to prevent systems from covertly manipulating psychological vulnerabilities. Some decisions are not just outcomes, they are influences. A system that decides what you see is making decisions about your attention. A system that decides which messages reach you is making decisions about your emotional state. A system that personalizes persuasion is making decisions about your beliefs. So the question becomes, where do we say, a machine should not be allowed to autonomously optimize influence over a human being? Because if the system's objective is engagement or conversion, it may learn strategies that exploit fear, shame, loneliness, or outrage. Humans need oversight, particularly where the system has the power to nudge identity, what you think people like you do, what you think your community believes, what you think is normal. If we don't set boundaries, we end up with autonomy that doesn't just predict behavior, it manufactures it.
Aiden, you said earlier that autonomy follows metrics. If we keep humans in the loop, what's the real limitation there? Where does that idea break down?
It breaks down when humans are in the loop in name only. There's a common pattern. The system produces a decision, the human gets it with a justification that's either too technical or too vague, and then the human is asked to approve it under time pressure. That's not oversight. That's liability theater. Also, cognitive overload matters. If a human has to review thousands of cases, they may become dependent on the system, especially if the system is right most of the time. That creates automation bias. People stop challenging outputs. So a more realistic approach is structured oversight. Decide which decisions must always go to humans. Decide what triggers escalation. Provide explanations that are actually useful. And log everything so decisions can be audited later. And crucially, give humans the power to override without punishment. If overruling the system makes you look inefficient or creates paperwork, people will stop doing it. Oversight has to be socially supported, not just technically possible.
That's a hard truth. If oversight exists but is discouraged, it's not oversight. Segment 4, Bias, Fairness, and Invisible Harm. Bias is often discussed like it's just a data issue, like, clean the data and you're done. But the harms can be subtle, compounding, and sometimes not easily measurable. Stella, when organizations say they want fair, autonomous decisions, what do they usually mean, and what do they miss?
They usually mean they want to avoid public backlash and legal exposure. That's the honest baseline. More generously, they might mean they want consistent treatment. But consistency isn't the same as fairness. They miss that fairness is plural. There are different definitions. Equal outcomes, equal error rates, equal opportunity. You can satisfy one and violate another. And they miss the operational reality. Fairness can drift. A model that's fair today can become unfair as populations change, as economic conditions change, as user behavior shifts. So the ethical move isn't just fairness at launch. It's continuous auditing, looking at decision patterns over time, by subgroup, across edge cases. Also, they miss that harm can be invisible when people don't know they were judged by a system. If you never learn why you were denied, you can't contest it. That's a fairness issue too.
Elena, talk to us about invisible harm, especially cognitive harm. Because that's not always captured in fairness dashboards.
Invisible harm is what happens when the system changes your internal world without a clear external event you can point to. If a loan is denied, you know something happened. But if a feed slowly shifts your perception of society, or if a recommendation system turns your attention into a habit loop, that harm is diffuse. It can feel like, this is just me, when it's actually an engineered environment. There's also the harm of misclassification that becomes identity shaping. If a system labels a teenager as at risk, and that label affects how adults treat them, the label can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. In clinical terms, we'd say the system is altering the person's context and reinforcing certain pathways. And the person often isn't aware of the mechanism. Ethically, we need to treat cognitive impact as a real category of harm, not an optional add-on. We don't just ask, was the decision accurate? We ask, what does this system do to attention, agency, self-esteem, polarization, trust?
Aiden, what are the practical tools for bias and fairness in architecture? And where do people overpromise?
The practical tools start with observability. If you can't see what your system is doing, you can't govern it. You need logging, monitoring, drift detection, subgroup performance metrics, and alerts when distribution shifts. You need model cards, data provenance, and documented assumptions. On the explainability side, you don't need a philosophical explanation. You need an operational one. What features contributed? What was the confidence? What counterfactual changes would flip the outcome? Can we show that in a way that a reviewer can use? Where people overpromise is thinking a single technique like explainable AI solves ethics. It doesn't. Explanation can be misleading. It can be gamed. It can be simplified to the point of being false. The stronger approach is layered governance, good datasets, fairness testing, adversarial evaluation, human review triggers, and continuous post-deployment auditing. And you have to accept this. Some applications are too ethically risky for full autonomy. The ethical choice can be, don't automate that.
Let's go into segment 5, accountability. This is where conversations get tense in real life. Because once you ask, who's responsible, you're not in theory anymore. You're in budgets, legal risk, power, and reputation. If an autonomous system makes a harmful decision, who owns that harm? Stella, what's your answer?
The organization that deploys it owns it. Full stop. If you choose to use autonomy to make decisions on your behalf, you don't get to outsource accountability to a vendor, to a dataset, or to the model did it. Organizations love to say, we use a third-party tool, but the person harmed doesn't care. They experienced your system in your context. So accountability means you must be able to explain your decision process, provide recourse, and fix harms. Also, accountability needs to be pre-planned. You build a system with a clear escalation path, customer support, dispute resolution, and internal ownership. Otherwise, when harm happens, everyone points at everyone else. And the system keeps running.
Elena, how do you see accountability when the harm is psychological or long-term? It's harder to prove, harder to trace.
It's harder, but that can't become an excuse. In medicine, we handle complex causality all the time. We still build standards of care. We still track outcomes. We still take responsibility for systems that may contribute to harm. For autonomous influence systems, accountability includes duty of care, not deploying persuasive systems without understanding potential cognitive impacts. It also includes meaningful consent and transparency. If your mental environment is being shaped by a system, you should know the goals of that shaping. Is it to inform you? Keep you engaged? Sell something? Reduce risk? Increase compliance? And when harm shows up, like rising anxiety, distorted beliefs, compulsive behavior, organizations should treat that as a signal deserving investigation, not as user choice. Design decisions create behavioral environments. Accountability must include those design decisions.
Aiden, from the builder's side, what does accountability mean for architects, engineers, and leaders? And what does a good governance framework look like?
Accountability is shared across the lifecycle, but it has to be clearly assigned. Architects and engineers are responsible for building systems that can be inspected, controlled, and safely degraded. Leaders are responsible for the decision to deploy and for the policies that define acceptable risk. A good governance framework includes at least 5 things. 1. Defines scope. What decisions is the system allowed to make? What decisions are off limits? 2. Risk classification. Low-stakes decisions can be automated more freely. High-stakes decisions require stricter oversight. 3. Auditability. Every autonomous decision should be traceable. Inputs, model version, reasoning artifacts, confidence in downstream action. 4. Recourse. People need a path to contest decisions, and when errors are found, the system must have mechanisms to correct and learn. 5. Incident response. Treat model failures like safety incidents. Document them, analyze them, fix them, and report them. And there's one more cultural piece: incentives. If teams get rewarded only for speed and cost savings, accountability becomes theoretical. If they get rewarded for safe performance and measured fairness, accountability becomes real.
Segment 6. Designing Ethical Autonomy. After everything we've discussed, I want to make sure we don't leave listeners with only fear or ambiguity. Because autonomy isn't automatically evil. It can reduce errors, expand access, and handle complexity humans can't. But ethical autonomy has to be intentional. So let's make this practical. If someone listening is a product leader, a policymaker, an engineer, a clinician working with tools, what does ethical autonomy look like in the real world? Stella, start us off. What are the boundaries you'd insist on?
Ethical autonomy starts with clear boundaries and clear language. First, define what the system can decide and what it can only recommend. Autonomy should be explicit, not implied. Second, define the values you're protecting. That sounds abstract, but it becomes concrete when you write policies like no fully automated denial for essential services without a human review option, or no model-driven decisions that affect protected rights without documented fairness evaluation. Third, build in recourse from day one. If a person can't challenge a decision, you've created a one-way power relationship. And fourth, treat ethics as a strategy function, not a compliance checkbox. If your ethical standards change only after a scandal, you're not governing. You're reacting.
Elena, what would human-centered design mean here, especially for mental well-being?
Human-centered design means you design for agency, not dependency. Practically, that includes limiting manipulative optimization. If the system can learn persuasive tactics, it must be constrained. It also means designing transparency that a real human can understand. Not a 40-page policy page nobody reads, but clear explanations. What data is used, what the system is trying to optimize, what choices the user has. And it means monitoring psychological outcomes. If a system influences attention and emotion, you should measure those impacts like you'd measure side effects. Ethical autonomy also respects vulnerable populations. Children, people in crisis, people with limited literacy, people under economic stress. They are easier to influence. A system must not treat vulnerability as an opportunity. Ultimately, if the system changes a person's behavior, the ethical question is, did it expand that person's freedom or narrow it?
Aiden, close the loop for us with architecture. If you were building a system from scratch with ethics embedded, what would you include?
I'd start by treating ethics as a set of non-functional requirements, like security, reliability, and privacy. Then I'd implement constraints in multiple layers. At the data layer, provenance, quality checks, and documentation of known gaps. At the model layer, fairness evaluation, calibration, robustness tests, and stress testing. At the decision layer, thresholds, human review triggers, and confidence-aware behavior. At the system layer, logging, versioning, audit trails, and continuous monitoring. And at the operations layer, incident response playbooks, red team exercises, and regular third-party audits. I'd also run simulations of worst cases, not just average accuracy, but what happens when the system meets adversarial users, rare edge cases, or shifting demographics. Finally, I design safe failure. If the system can't be confident, it should degrade into a safer mode, ask for help, pause, or revert to a simpler rule with known behavior. Ethical autonomy is basically autonomy that knows its limits and is forced to respect them.
I want to end by connecting a few threads. Autonomous decision systems are not just technical artifacts. They are social systems with code inside them. They carry the incentives of organizations, the assumptions of designers, the flaws of data, and the constraints, or lack of constraints, of governance. We've said a few things today that I hope stick. 1. Autonomy scales consequences. 2. Speed without boundaries is an ethical choice. 3. Human in the loop can't be symbolic, it has to be empowered and supported. 4. Harm isn't only visible outcomes, it can be invisible, cognitive, and cumulative. 5. Accountability can't be outsourced to the machine. And 6. Ethical autonomy is something you build, through boundaries, observability, recourse, constraints, and a culture that rewards responsible decisions. 𝗬𝗓, Dr. Elena Ruiz, 𝗂𝗵𝗵, thank you for bringing depth to this conversation.
Thank you, 𝗂𝗵𝗲𝗿. My hope is that listeners leave with a sense that ethics isn't the thing that slows innovation down. Ethics is what makes innovation sustainable and worthy of trust.
Thank you. And I'll add, the mind is part of the environment now. When systems shape perception and attention, we need ethics that protects inner life, not just external outcomes.
Appreciate the conversation. The optimistic takeaway for builders is that we do have tools. We can design constraints. We can build auditability. We can simulate failures. The choice is whether we prioritize those things.
And thank you for listening. This has been the BI channel, where data meets decisions. If this episode made you rethink a system you use every day, that's the point. The future isn't just automated. It's governed, or it isn't. Until next time.